when there isn't a sidewalk, that's very much the same thing, that you can be caught flat-footed, where the police would be looking for a reason of jaywalking, because inevitably, if you are walking without a sidewalk present, that would be the case in every situation. Some by accident. I just had something that I didn't know was on me, and I didn't understand that that was there because I had grown accustomed to it until I looked in the mirror. I saw there was a spot on my neck. I grabbed at it. It was a tiny bug, and its abdomen was pulsing when I took it off my neck. This reminded me of one time there was a spider underneath my chin, and I didn't know it was there, and it had come like symmetric with being under my chin until I plucked it off. And this is kind of disturbing. Actually, it's incredibly horrific. And so when you start getting comfortable with things that you didn't know any better from, it's almost the same as inducing a whole bunch of unnecessary features to your body that aren't even supposed to be there in the first place. When I saw that abdomen pumping, I saw that I was disembarking it from its comfortability, mainly it being latched on to me, almost as a whale has like tiny fishes that suck onto its belly and uses that as a vessel for mobility. If you're being used as a vessel for mobility, for something to be active, well then you're a vehicle of not having an option to be otherwise. This is one thing that the slaves of the Egyptians, Pharaoh, had embarked. It became so horrendous that a person named Moses came and actually had to free them. Bugs on your neck and spiders under your chin. Well, because your ability to know that they're getting there is your own fault. I would argue that I have like a keen sensibility. It's more of a pest control issue where the government should have more cleanliness for areas of public affairs. And so you go back and forth and it gets real complex. So the point of having one is eliminated because the separate accord, the default of a dummy variable, mainly fighting a cause of nature. In order to have the nature, the root cause can't be to eliminate it. Do you see where the snake is biting its tail? So I guess back to the thresholds, you need proper goals to gain off of a threshold and a point system. And the point system can only be accepted as opposed to it being told late in the game what the rules have to be in order to play it. Whereas when you make a computer a game or a video game, the developers of the game aren't putting a price point because the buyer has the option to look at the game or the puzzle. You're buying the puzzle, you get to choose which one you want and if it is worth the value of spending. But if you created a video game and there wasn't any point to it other than being inside of its arena, you would just go around and look at its scenery. So it would be just a really good looking video game. I suppose that's what a puzzle is. When you buy a puzzle and put the pieces together, you're enjoying putting it together just to look at the picture at the end. The point to it is not to break any pieces. With the action that people take each day, it should not be tampered with in order to have something activate which they're not aware of. If they're having something activate, such as the ability to sit down at a cafe and drink coffee just for a normal leisure, if that's being interrupted by like a policeman coming up and having to look at the paper passport of being outside, the double standard eliminates the initial action. How many different ways you can play a game can be written down. Well, how many different ways of achieving the victory in the game? Well, those are a lot fewer. When you're designing a game, like if it's a video game, you have the area of objects and the scenery. These are meant to have purposes in the positions, and when they don't, it's just arbitrary. There's the player in the game isn't benefiting from it. I am mistaken if I don't know any better. Whereas if there's some reason for me to keep looking over my shoulder because I'm always scared for too many things that shouldn't be there, that's a separate issue. Someone might say I'm schizophrenic. Others would say you're in no position to be walking around with a camera speaking on rules. Whereas in France, it's hard to even just sit down at a cafe or asking you for your paper. So there's like obstacles, there's alignments, and then there's contrast. Is a contracept an ailment? And what would the difference be if one had to be a deficit in order for it to even make anything come into a fruition? Well, then that would be called an adjuvant. The adjuvant is something you don't want to align, even if it's a contracept, despite its reward in the end goal, because it could wipe out anything that was worth having in the first place prior to it being applied. You know, I would put all the chips in. They say don't put all your eggs into one basket when it comes to banking off a miss. And as much traction that is gained for offsets, that much more is able to be used to jump the hurdle. One of the worst things you can do is force a knot if you're on either end, and it would just tighten the more that you have the wrong latchet. One of the worst things other than that would be if you were stuck in the middle of the knot as it's being tightened and you didn't know that the more that you struggle, the tighter it's going to get. These are things that are inclusive of having to understand what is a contaminant and how to deal with it. I have flies that come and land on me and the things that I ingest. How much is that similar to just dropping the item on the ground and picking it up, or catching a backdraft of something that is worse than the first two examples? If it's not defined, then it's going to be hard to find any difference in the making, and then more exhibits will be pushed to the forefront without any reason for them not to be. Meanwhile, if you're stuck in a definition, you're liable to be part of the non-inclusive or the non-essential. The baby boomers have told me they've never seen anything quite like this, with the news propagating red dots of death and spikes, but without the definition of a cycle, the obstacles are up in the air just as much as Bill Gates releasing genetically modified mosquitoes. Despite anyone liking that or not, it could or could not be more dangerous than a backdraft. That just echoes, especially if they're enhanced from a different cycle. Cycles are fantastic. It would be the first person who created the wheel would tell you not to try and reinvent it. Whereas unicycles are just as fantastic as a tricycle, unless you don't have a center of balance, where then it would be thrown into a sorts of a different trajectory, mainly an axis of wavering. You might see this in a pendulum, although when a cycle is induced in a propulsion and it's wavering, you're going to get multiple axes that act in the centropedance of figure eights. Figure eights are so spectacular because they mimic what a wave function would induce. Waves and troughs, much to the dismay of anyone with a calculator, that anything is being calculated upon motion, given that it's exerting a magnetic field. I think that's how the Egyptians ran themselves short. Without devices, they're trying to enact calculations of binary with pyramids and statues and articles of clothing that seem symmetric. Even their coffins with architecture, tombs.